The world was in shock when a 21-year-old woman from Wrocław, Poland claimed to be Madeleine Mccann, the British girl who went missing in Portugal in 2007. Julia Faustina, as she called herself, took to social media to announce her revelation. The news spread like wildfire, and the world watched in anticipation as the drama unfolded. Faustina claimed that she was sexually abused by a German pedophile who was once a suspect in the Mccann case. She pointed to a range of inaccuracies and mysteries about her early years as proof that she was the missing Briton. She stated that the people who raised her were not her biological parents and provided physical evidence such as moles and a rare anatomical eye condition to support her claims. Faustina posted a series of photos and videos on Instagram account at Madeleine Mccann, purporting to prove that she is the British child. She revealed that she had post-traumatic amnesia as a result of being sexually abused by a German pedophile. She believed that one of Madeleine's suspects several years ago was Martin Ney, whom Faustina believes may be her abuser's son. She claimed that the man who abused her is married to and lives with her maternal grandmother in Poland. The world was stunned by the news, and the authorities were caught off guard. The Mccann family, who had been waiting for over a decade for any news about their daughter, were cautious but willing to explore the possibility that Faustina could indeed be Madeleine. They consented to a DNA test to ascertain whether Julia was, in fact, their legitimate daughter. Meanwhile, the media was going crazy with the story. Journalists and reporters from all over the world flocked to Wrocław to cover the story. Faustina became an overnight sensation, with everyone wanting to interview her and hear her story. But as the days passed, it became clear that Faustina's claims were not as straightforward as they seemed. The authorities discovered inconsistencies in her story, and the evidence she provided was not conclusive. The DNA test, which was supposed to be the final proof, turned out negative. Faustina was not Madeleine Mccann. The media, who had built Faustina up to be the biggest story of the decade, turned on her. They accused her of making false claims and being a fraud. Her life was turned upside down as she faced backlash from the world. In the midst of all this, Faustina's mental health began to deteriorate. The sudden fame and scrutiny had taken its toll on her. She was admitted to a psychiatric ward, suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It was a sad end to a story that had captured the world's attention. As the world moved on from the story, the Mccann family continued to search for their daughter. They never gave up hope that someday they would find her. And while Faustina's claims turned out to be false, her story highlighted the plight of missing children and the families that are left behind to deal with the aftermath. The drama of Julia Faustina and her claims of being Madeleine Mccann had come to an end. But the world would never forget the little girl who had gone missing in Portugal in 2007, and the family that never stopped searching for her. In the following days, Julia's social media posts went viral, and she became the subject of intense media scrutiny. People from all over the world had an opinion on her claims, and the Mccann family issued a statement saying that they were cooperating with the authorities to determine whether or not Julia was, in fact, their missing daughter. The investigation into Julia's claims was slow going, and she became increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress. One day, while scrolling through the comments on her Instagram account, Julia noticed a message from a woman who claimed to have information about her past. The woman said that she had been a maid at the resort where the Mccanns were staying on the night that Madeleine disappeared, and that she had seen something that could be relevant to Julia's case. Julia arranged to meet the woman, who introduced herself as Maria, in a quiet corner of a park. Maria was an older woman with deeply lined features and a kind face. She was nervous, and Julia could see that she was shaking. Maria told Julia that on the night that Madeleine disappeared, she had been cleaning the rooms in the resort. As she passed by the Mccann's apartment, she heard a strange noise coming from inside. Curiosity getting the better of her, she leaned in closer to listen. She could hear the sound of someone whispering, but she couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, the door to the apartment opened, and a man stepped out. Maria had only caught a glimpse of him, but she remembered that he was tall and had dark hair. He looked at her and said something in Portuguese, but Maria didn't understand what he was saying. He then hurried off down the hallway, and Maria never saw him again. After Maria finished her story, Julia felt a chill run down her spine. She had a strong feeling that this man was somehow connected to her past. She thanked Maria for her time and promised to keep in touch. Over the next few weeks, Julia began to feel increasingly anxious. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and she started to have nightmares about a man with dark hair who was chasing her. She felt as though she was going crazy, and she was too scared to go to the police for fear that they would think she was delusional. One night, Julia was walking home from the grocery store when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see a man with dark hair standing a few feet away from her. He had a sinister look in his eye, and Julia knew immediately that he was the man from her nightmares. Without thinking, Julia turned and ran in the opposite direction. She ran as fast as she could, but the man was faster. He chased her through the empty streets, and Julia could hear his heavy breathing getting closer and closer. Finally, Julia reached a police station and ran inside. She was shaking with fear, and she could barely speak. The police officers calmed her down and listened to her story. They took her statement and promised to investigate. A few days later, the police arrested a man who matched the description that Julia had given them. He was a convicted sex offender who had been released from prison a few months earlier. When they searched his apartment, they found evidence that linked him to Madeleine McCann's disappearance. The news made headlines all over the world, and Julia became a hero overnight. The McCann family thanked her for her bravery, and Julia finally found the closure that she had been searching for. She knew that she wasn't Madeleine McCann, but she had played a small part in bringing her family some peace. During the investigation, Julia shared with the police her proof of being Madeleine, including photos and videos, as well as her story of being sexually abused by a German pedophile, who she believed to be the son of Martin A., one of the suspects in the McCann case. Despite Julia's claims, the police could not confirm her identity as Madeleine McCann. DNA tests were conducted, but the results were inconclusive due to the degraded nature of the samples, as well as the lack of DNA from Madeleine's father, Jerry McCann. Meanwhile, the media had a field day with the story. Headlines proclaimed that Madeleine had been found, and that the mystery of her disappearance had finally been solved. The McCanns themselves remained silent, choosing not to comment on the ongoing investigation. As time passed, however, it became clear that Julia's claims were unfounded. The German pedophile she had accused of abusing her turned out to have no connection to the McCann case, and Martin A. was eventually ruled out as a suspect as well. Julia, it seemed, was not Madeleine McCann. But what had led her to make such a claim? Was she mentally unwell, as some suggested? Or was there something more sinister at play? The truth, it turned out, was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Julia had grown up in a dysfunctional family, with a mother who suffered from mental illness and a father who was physically abusive. Her childhood had been marked by trauma, including sexual abuse at the hands of a family friend. Desperate to escape her past, Julia had constructed a fantasy world in which she was Madeleine McCann, the victim of a high-profile kidnapping. In this world, she was not just a survivor, but a hero, hailed by the media and celebrated by the world. But the fantasy could only last so long. Eventually, Julia's story began to unravel, and she was forced to confront the reality of her own life. It was a painful process, but one that ultimately led to her finding the help and support she needed to move forward. As for the McCanns, they continued to search for their daughter, who remained missing. The investigation into her disappearance was ongoing, and while there were no new leads, they held out hope that one day they would find her and bring her home. Go on. With the entire world watching and waiting, the McCanns arrive at the police station to take the DNA test. Jerry McCann is sweating profusely, and Kate looks as if she's about to break down. They know that this test will change their lives forever. If it turns out that Julia is their daughter, they will have to face the painful reality of the trauma she experienced, which will be a huge burden to bear. If she isn't, they will be left with the same empty feeling they've had for the past 16 years. The test results come back in just a few days, and the entire world waits with bated breath. Finally, the announcement is made: Julia Faustina is not Madeleine McCann. The McCanns are relieved and saddened at the same time. They're glad that Julia doesn't have to live with the pain they've experienced, but they're still searching for their daughter, and they'll never give up. Julia, on the other hand, is devastated. She feels as if she's lost her identity and doesn't know who she is anymore. She feels as if she's been rejected by the only family she's ever known, and she's lost her sense of self. She spends weeks in bed, not wanting to face the world. Finally, she decides to take matters into her own hands. She contacts the German police and tells them everything she knows about her abuser. She tells them about the moles and eye condition that she believes prove that she's Madeleine, and she urges them to investigate further. She also contacts the McCanns and tells them that she's still willing to help in any way she can. The German police begin to investigate Martin A., the man Julia believes may be her abuser's son. They find that Ney had been in Portugal at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, and that he had a history of sexually abusing children. They bring Ney in for questioning, and he denies any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. Meanwhile, Julia is still struggling to come to terms with her own identity. She feels as if she's lost a part of herself, and she doesn't know how to move on. She begins to see a therapist, who helps her to work through her trauma and find a new sense of self. As the investigation into Martin Ney continues, the police begin to find more and more evidence against him. They find that he had been in contact with a known pedophile who had been in the area at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. They also find that he had been in contact with several other pedophiles, and that he had a history of using the internet to contact children. Finally, after months of investigation, the police arrest Martin Ney for the abduction and murder of Madeleine McCann. The McCanns are relieved to have some closure, but they're still grieving the loss of their daughter. Julia is also relieved, but she's still struggling to come to terms with her own identity. She decides to take a break from social media and the public eye and focus on her own healing. Years go by, and Julia slowly begins to find a new sense of self. She realizes that even though she's not Madeleine, she's still a survivor, and she's still someone who can make a difference in the world. She starts a charity to help other survivors of sexual abuse, and she becomes an advocate for children's rights. The McCanns also continue to work to raise awareness about missing children and to support other families who are going through similar experiences. They never forget their daughter, but they find a new sense of purpose in helping others. As soon as the news of Julia's claims made its way into the media, the McCann family's lawyer contacted her to arrange a meeting. Despite the lawyer's attempts to keep it low-key, the news still spread quickly, and the press soon descended upon the small village where Julia lived. One night, Julia woke up to the sound of her front door creaking open. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, as she heard footsteps in the hallway.